What is up, you guys? Small disclaimer, this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. I will be demonstrating how these weapon systems are broken down as well as how they function. Sadly, there will not be a live fire demonstration of these weapons, especially that you can see the person carrying the VSS had a very bad day. The AS-Val, like the VSS, has been demilled to Ukrainian standards. I am currently a soldier in the Ukrainian army serving on the eastern side of the country, to which these two fine examples of unique firearms were captured by Ukrainian forces and then later legally transferred to me as non-functional trophies. And during the disassembly, I will be explaining that. Let's get into it. The AS-Val is absolutely one of my most favorite rifles out there, and I was lucky enough to be able to not only get my hands on the AS-Val, but also a slightly damaged VSS. I will be demonstrating how to disassemble it as well as how it functions, but we won't be shooting it, and I won't be giving you guys any of the history of the weapon system or any of the stats of the weapon system. A lot of you guys who are clicking and viewing this video, you probably already know everything there is to know about this weapon system. You're just interested in the details that are extremely hard to come by. And that's kind of what I want to make my gun review content about, not just spewing out facts and stuff that you guys already know. So, just like the AK, it has a safety lever that, one in its safe position, allows you to open the bolt, but not enough to chamber around. It has a safety lever as well as a selector lever from semi to full auto, and we'll be discussing that in a minute. Again, similar to the AK, it has a mag release, a latch underneath allows you to drop the mag. Flipping over, it uses torsion pressure and friction to hold this particular model of the PSO-1-1 scope onto the weapon. This is an actual 9x39 scope. It is a modified version of the same scope that you see on the SVD. Right here on the left, you see the SVD reticle. On the right, you see the AS-Val and the VSS reticle. This scope is that one with the right reticle, specifically designed for the drop of the VSS. Other than that, this scope is almost identical to the scopes found on the SVD. Pull that latch, remove the scope from the weapon system. Let's go over some of the external features of this rifle. First, you have your safety. You then have your selector. On the right side of the receiver, the selector is set to semi. Pushing it to the left side of the receiver, it is now in full auto mode. Both the VSS as well as the AS-Val has this function. Up top, you have the graduated rear sight, and it goes all the way, it says 10 to 42. Those are in 100-meter increments. So it's 100, 200, or 100, 150, 200, 220, 250, 273, so on. And then at the very front, you have your single front sight. There is a pin here that with a special tool you can adjust the windage of the front sight. Just similar to the AK, you can adjust the height of the front sight to adjust for your shooting group. Also on this particular AS-Val, you have a CNC'd aluminum Picatinny rail system. Underneath the receiver, this button allows you to take off the suppressor as well as the front handguard. You have your magazine release, your pistol grip, rear sling swivel, flipping it over, This button right here allows for the latch on the side folding stock to release the side folding stock. You are then able to fold the side folding stock onto the side. This right here is another latch. By pushing downwards on this latch, it opens up the stock from the receiver. The button itself acts as a spring. By pushing spring tension onto that button, allows for easy and quick deploying of the stock. You have on the right side of the receiver a single dot denoting semi-auto, and then on the left side of the receiver you have 3 dots denoting full auto. The selector right here is a very smooth and crisp selector. It is very straightforward, easy to use, and with your shooting hand you can quickly select from semi to full. So as you are engaging, by the way, chamber is empty. So as you are engaging combatants in the semi-auto mode, you need to switch to full auto. It's a quick switch from and then back in to the fight now in full auto. These do run 20 round, 10 round, and there are 30 round magazines for these weapon systems. Breaking this down is very similar to the AK style weapon systems. There's a lock so this thing can't disengage. There's a little spring-loaded latch on the top of the drive spring, pushing this whole assembly forward. You are now able to remove the top cover, and you have 2 springs on the inside. You have your drive spring and you have your firing spring. This is a striker fired weapon, so with the AKs you will have a hammer in the rearward position. Once the bolt cycles, you would have a hammer in the rearward position. When you pull the trigger, normally the hammer will rotate forward from spring tension, striking the back of the bolt, striking the back of the bolt carrier group, hitting the firing pin. Firing pin engages the primer and fires the weapon system. But with the VSS and the AS-Val, this tube right here connects to the bolt face. Inside the bolt face is a captured firing pin. That captured firing pin has no spring tension or anything underneath it. It is just free floating. So when the striker hits the back of the firing pin hits the primer and fires the weapon system. So you will notice that there are 2 springs inside this weapon system. You have the primary drive spring, which closes the bolt, and then you have your striker spring. As you cycle the weapon to chamber around, the drive spring will actually close the bolt, but the sear will actually hold the striker to the rear until you're ready to fire. One of the things about this trigger system that is different from all your other hammer-fired rifles is that this trigger is an extremely smooth trigger. So as you are on a hammer-fired weapon system, your ARs, your AKs, you will actually start to pull back the trigger, you will feel a wall. And then once you push past that wall, then that's when the hammer will drop. With the VSS and the AS-Val, you don't really have that wall. You can start to feel the tension pick up in the springs in the sear as you rotate forward, and I will demonstrate that once we get these out of here. But you will actually feel a difference in pressure once you get to about this far back, but the entirety of this trigger pull is absolutely smooth. I don't have any testing equipment to give you guys an idea of how heavy this trigger pull is. So disassembly of the bolt carrier group is you have the drive spring, you push forward slightly, there's a little notch, and you pull out. You see this little notch? So you have this horseshoe that fits over the guide, spring guide for the striker spring, and then you have this little notch. And in the back of the receiver, you actually have a notch and a hole. So here's the striker pin. So you have the spring guide itself actually sits, the striker sits right there. It sits against the back of the receiver. So there's a hole for here and a little notch for here. And this whole assembly just gets held in to the receiver in the back. Now to remove the bolt carrier group, you remove the striker. You pull this out, pull the bolt all the way to the rear, and then lift out. Now on the bolt, it has a similar bolt carrier or a bolt face to weapon systems such as the AR platform of weapons. And simply slide out of the bolt carrier, rotate slightly, and there you have the bolt face, the bolt carrier with its captured piston. Now is the gas tube. You just slowly rotate and remove. There's a small nub on the outside of the gas tube that corresponds with a small slot machined in the front of the receiver. Now to remove the suppressor, you push down on this button on the underside of the receiver and you rotate the suppressor 90 degrees. This now frees the suppressor from the barrel assembly. You have a compression spring at the very tip of the barrel, which pushes against the suppressor components, as well as pushing the locking lips of the suppressor against the receiver of the rifle, which allows for a nice solid fit. Now if you look on the inside of the suppressor, you see that there are these two cutouts in the suppressor as well as some full material. This is why you rotate it 90 degrees. And then if you look on the inside of the suppressor itself, you see there's this track. This track corresponds with, remove the handguard as well, but this track corresponds with this machined wedge, and as the suppressor is locked into position, it is forced down, forced against this compression spring. Compression spring sits on the top of this barrel, forced down against the compression spring, and creates a very nice, solid, rigid fit. Now, some of you guys are going to start getting upset with what I'm about to show you, but this weapon system, when it was captured from the Russian units, before it was transferred to me, in order for them to legally transfer this weapon to myself, they actually had to demill the barrel. They demilled the barrel by taking a grinder and cutting a long slit along not only the component of the receiver, but also the entirety of the barrel. Yes, it is slightly upsetting that they had to do this, but again, in order for me to legally possess this weapon without any issues with the Ukrainian government, they did have to demill the barrel. They left the bolt itself intact. Normally they will have to demill the barrel as well as the bolt, but if I chose to convert this into an SHP, basically a blank firing weapon, which I can do, I can leave the bolt itself intact. There are some other things that will have to be done to this barrel in order to make sure that it completely abides by the Ukrainian law. And I will be doing some of those things here shortly. But here you have the fully disassembled AS-Val. So now with the weapon system fully disassembled, let's look at how it functions. So you have your bolt carrier group, and you have your striker. Inside the receiver, you have basically three components. You have your disconnector, and you have two sears. The disconnector's job is at the base of the striker, there is a little lip. When it fully engages in the battery, you will see the disconnector move. It moves up and out of the way of the striker. This allows this weapon system not to fire until the bolt fully closes, because it prevents the striker, now being held by the disconnector, it prevents it from going forward until the bolt is fully closed. When selecting your modes of fire, so you have your, first off, safe, and simply all this does is rotate right in there a little notch, and then underneath it is the machine part, a little wing. That little wing, when you put the weapon from safe, disengage your safe, that little wing now can freely move inside that notch. And then that, as it moves, there's a little nub on the back of the trigger, which pushes up on the sears. There's a nub on the front of this trigger that pushes down on the semi-sear. So right now we're in semi-auto, and as you pull the trigger, this sear drops. So you pull the trigger, you see this, the right sear will drop and the left sear will rise. And what that does is, as the striker goes forward to hit the firing pin, fires both cycles. Even though you're still holding the trigger, this second sear will actually hold the striker in the rearward position, preventing you from firing in full automatic mode. Switching it to full auto mode from a disengaged position, and inside here to an engaged position. That small engagement, what that now does is it pushes a bar underneath the left sear, which is under spring tension, and as you pull, the trigger would want to drop forward in semi movement, full auto. So now let's see how the sears and disconnector work in conjunction with each other. So as the weapon system cycles, if it doesn't as a weapon system cycles, it brings the striker all the way to the rear, and it's originally held in by the disconnector. And as you can kind of clearly see, it still has some space to go between the disconnector and the sear. If the barrel does not, or if the bolt does not fully seat, it does not engage or disengage the disconnector, which holds the striker into position, preventing the striker from firing while the bolt is not fully in battery. Now, if you see, by closing the bolt all the way, you will actually see the striker go forward slightly. See, the striker goes forward slightly. Pulling the trigger, frees the striker, striker goes forward, hits the bolt, or hits the firing pin fires the round propels the gases from the round, push the bolt back to the rear, and the whole firing cycle gets started over again, releasing tension on the spring, or tension on the trigger, resets the first sear will reset, allowing it to go forward to the second sear. And the semi-auto sear will then allow you to fire again in semi-auto. In full auto, bolt is all the way forward. You pull the trigger. The second sear has been moved out of the way through the selector lever as the bolt travels forward. Once it hits and disengages the disconnect, there's literally nothing now stopping the striker from going forward. You're still holding the trigger down, so the right side selector, or excuse me, you're still holding the trigger down. The right side sear is disengaged. The left side sear is disengaged through the selector lever, and the only thing holding the striker back is the disconnector. Once the bolt goes all the way forward, it fires again, cycles, and continues to fire until the magazine is out of ammo, or there is a malfunction in the weapon system itself, or until you release pressure on the trigger. Now let's talk about the differences between the AS-Val and the VSS. Other than the most obvious, the VSS has a fixed stock and the AS-Val has a side-folding stock. There's almost absolutely no difference between both of these weapons, other than the one major change in the receiver to accommodate both of the stocks, as well as another smaller difference for the AS-Val to accommodate its folding stock. So a lot of people might say, oh, it's barrel length. The AS-Val or the VSS has a sniper barrel. The AS-Val has a heavier barrel for full auto fire. Both of these barrels are absolutely identical, both in the length and also both in the diameter of the barrel itself. So we have my Pittsburgh calipers, because I'm not bringing my Mitutoyos out here. You know, you got 0.706, so almost 3/4 of an inch thick barrel. And then right here you have 0.704. So 0.02 of an inch difference. When manufacturing, there's a lot of times you can have up to 0.005 difference in the size of the manufacturing, the tolerance allowed in manufacturing. So like I said, the only difference is how the rear part of the receivers were machined, and also here on the side where the side folding stock of the AS-Val interfaces with the receiver. There was additional machining done here to remove this gap right here, as well as cutting a slot right here to allow for the latch right here to engage and lock into the receiver. You do not have that on the VSS. And the only difference in disassembly of the VSS compared to the AS-Val is you have this button here. Pushing down this button allows you to remove the stock from the receiver. So as you push this button, you will see this nub clear out of the way, and with the dovetails cut into the bottom of the receiver, and then this hole drilled into the bottom allows this stock to lock into the receiver and out of the receiver. In the VSS, you don't have that hole for the nub for the receiver, but you do have this wedge piece here. It's identical to those found in the AKs, and that's just simply to allow attaching of the pistol grip to the weapon system, to the receiver itself. Let's talk about reassembling the rifle. First, you're going to take your gas tube, and on the gas tube you see this nub. That nub lines up with a slot or a hole cut into the gas tube guide on the front of the receiver. You slide that in, rotate it until this nub is facing upwards. You're then going to take your bolt carrier and your bolt face. You're going to insert the bolt face into the bolt carrier, and as you push down, you're going to rotate. You want to have the extractor on the left side of the bolt while you're looking at it. On the inside of the receiver, you're going to notice this hole and this notch cut into the receiver. That hole and that notch are going to be for the striker spring, as well as the main drive spring, the notch at the back of the buffer of the main drive spring. You're going to, on the front of the bolt, you see this flat side on this locking lug. This flat side will run along this rail. So when you insert the bolt carrier into the receiver, this needs to be slightly forward, and this lug, as you see, rides along that channel, pushing the whole bolt carrier assembly forward. You then take your striker assembly, push it, pull the trigger, send it home inside the bolt face itself. You then put in your spring for the your striker spring, and you will notice at the back of your striker spring there's just this machined area that is not covered by the spring. That is where the grooves right here will fit in. So you will put your main drive spring into the receiver, and then as you see that area right there, you push that forward and you push the back of the buffer right here into that notch, and now your main components of your bolt carrier and operating system is installed. You will then take your top cover, and just like an AK, this goes underneath this lip right here. You're going to push slightly forward on the drive spring assembly. Push that down, and it's now locked. So the drive spring assembly and this the back of the op rod locks the receiver plate to the receiver. Now it's time to put the handguard on. Just slides over the barrel, slides over the gas block, and is locked into place by that button. You will then take the spring, the compression spring that puts pressure on the suppressor, and you will notice at the bottom of the compression spring there is that little nub machined into it. At the top of the receiver, at the top of the barrel, there's actually that nub machined in there. You push and you set it like that, like so. Now, installing the suppressor, you hold the suppressor at 90 degrees. You slide it all the way back. You see where this wedge machined into the receiver or the gas block itself. It lines up perfectly with the slot that's cut on the inside of the suppressor. And as you rotate the suppressor, you will see the suppressor start to tighten down on the receiver, and with tension on the spring that's inside will give a nice solid fit. You rotate until you hear the click of the button. There's no way to over torque this, and that is how you reassemble the AS-Val. Now the only difference between the VSS and the AS-Val is the buttstock. If you've removed the buttstock during cleaning or maintenance or storage, it is just simply you line up these dovetails, and you sometimes need to push the button in a little, push this, and set it home. And now the reassembly of the VSS is identical to the AS-Val. Before I close this out, I wanted to address some comments that would probably be popping up after I post this video. First off, starting with, no, it's not going to be a shame that I have to leave both of these. I wouldn't be able to bring either one of these rifles back with me to the United States. And here's generally why. I own a manufacturing company in the United States. It's a complete CNC shop with Haas mills, Haas lathes, measuring equipment, testing equipment. Anything that I dream up or design, I can easily produce. And if it's a limitation to the equipment that I don't have, I can easily outsource those components to another company and have them build that for me and then bring it back into my company. So before I returned to Ukraine back in March of 2022, myself and some investors and partners, we were going to form a Type 10 manufacturer in the States, and with that we would have been able to produce a large variety of firearms onto the civilian market. One of my dream weapons was the AS-Val and the VSS. And when the opportunity came for me to purchase both of these rifles here in Ukraine, a Ukrainian unit had captured them from the Russians. They had put them up for sale, needing funds to increase their capabilities. I let my partners and investors know that we had one perfect example of an AS-Val and then one slightly damaged VSS, but the receiver itself was in perfect condition, that we would go ahead and purchase these so that I could take the measurements off of them, create some 3D models of the rifles, and then we would take those models back to the United States and start production of both the AS-Val and the VSS. and to address a rumor that a particular individual or a group of individuals had tried to start regarding me, none of the funds that I fundraised for my team was used to purchase either of these rifles. Like I said, some investors and partners of mine who were keen on getting their hands on the manufacturing blueprints of both of these rifles, they fronted the money in order to pay for them, and in exchange I would keep both of these trophies, and I will provide to them the 3D files needed to start production of both of these rifles. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video demonstrating the field stripping, the reassembly, and the functions of the AS-Val and the VSS. Hopefully in the future I will be able to find the time to do more of these videos on other weapon systems, predominantly Russian weapon systems, Soviet weapon systems, that there aren't not that many videos out there showing you guys how they disassemble, reassemble, or even function. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and let me know if this is more content that you would like to see from me in the future.